sisters and I received a phone call from my 6-year-old cousin, Ruby. She told us she had some exciting news, and we could just feel the joy in her voice as she began to speak. Now, when a little kid tells me they have something exciting to say, I usually expect it to be something like they lost a tooth, or they went to the park, or maybe, more extraordinarily, Mom let them eat ice cream for dinner. Now, don't get me wrong, these are all thrilling things, but a little less magical to someone my age than they are to a 6-year-old. So you can imagine our surprise when what Ruby revealed was that her mom, our aunt, was going to have a baby. Suddenly we understood the thrilled tone, and you should have heard the squeals of delight that followed. Over the next few months, we joyfully awaited this new addition to the family, asking questions like, would Grandma finally have a grandson in a family of all girls? Or would the baby have red hair like its 2 older sisters? All these things and more went through our heads as we anticipated this new arrival. After 3 months, the day had finally come when we would learn whether the baby was a boy or a girl, and we could finally stop having to talk about the awkward it. My aunt told my mom that she would text her around 9 a.m. with the results. However, the text didn't come. After 2 hours of panicked waiting, my mom got news from my grandma. Rather than learning the baby's gender, we learned that my cousin had a serious birth defect known as trisomy 18, and that this defect would greatly reduce our chances of ever getting to meet this child. Today we'll get a basic background on what trisomy 18 is. Then we'll look at the impact of the doctor's response to these diagnoses. And finally, I'll talk about the unique gift of each life. Through all this, we'll see that the value of life is not measured by our circumstances. Trisomy 18 is a genetic chromosomal disorder. After learning my cousin had it, whom we soon learned was a boy named Tad, my whole family began researching like crazy to figure out what this disorder was and what it meant for Tad. The Lucile Packard Children's Hospital at Stanford explained that each person has 23 pairs of chromosomes, and that trisomy 18 occurs when there is an extra chromosome on the 18th pair. This extra chromosome affects every single cell in the body, making things that are just ordinary functions for you and me much more difficult. WebMD said that it can cause heart and kidney complications, difficulties in breathing, bone malformations, as well as many other problems. A more commonly known form of trisomy is trisomy 21, or Down syndrome. And although according to the Trisomy 18 Foundation, trisomy 18 is the second most common form of a trisomy, you are probably less familiar with it since it is so much more difficult for children who have it to survive. Many children diagnosed with this before birth don't survive to their birth, and of the few that do, less than 10% are able to celebrate their first birthday. In difficult times like receiving a diagnosis for trisomy 18, the doctor's response is critical to the woman and child involved. When Tad was diagnosed with trisomy 18, the doctors told my family that this diagnosis was lethal and meant that Tad was incompatible with life. The doctor then suggested terminating the pregnancy. This is flawed thinking. The doctor, a man whose job is to save and protect lives, was suggesting to end one simply because it wasn't the ideal life. He implied that ending the life now would take away the pain of a possible early death later. Earlier I used the term birth defect. As technology has advanced and abortion has become standard practice, this term of birth defect has turned into a death sentence for many. According to research done by Dr. Brian Scotco, a pediatric geneticist at Children's Hospital Boston, the abortion rate for children prenatally diagnosed with Down syndrome is at the shockingly high rate of 92%. Although the abortion rate for trisomy 18 children is unknown, we can assume it to be just as high, if not higher, since the prognosis is even more serious. Whereas this terminology is deadly to the children involved, it is also harmful to the family members of these children. When a woman is told that her living child has no chance of life, and that the best option for everyone involved is going to be to terminate it now. Her first instinct is going to be to trust her doctor. For many years, my aunt has been an advocate for the unborn. And while she didn't consider abortion for even a moment, she could see how a woman in this situation could easily be manipulated towards the decision to terminate. The doctor's words might lead her to believe that ending the life now will be the least painful solution. But the simple truth is that there is no remedy for the pain of death. In the British newspaper The Guardian, a story was published about a woman who was given the news that her child had trisomy. Her doctor then suggested an immediate termination. This guidance from her doctor led her to make a decision that not only ended her child's life, but it made matters worse by adding guilt and regret to that loss. She said, "This decision and its consequences has tortured me for the past 9 years. I have felt so out of step with the rest of the world, where the validity of abortion is a given, and to admit to feeling uneasy about it seems to make you a traitor to any notion of sisterhood. But also, crucially, out of an overwhelming and isolating sense of shame at my actions. Understand that we need to have compassion for these women, because the doctor's words not only hurt the child, they also hurt the mother." Now that we've looked at what trisomy 18 is and the impact of the doctor's response to these diagnoses, let's look at the unique gift of each life. Tad's story is just one example of our culture trying to play God. In the abortion debate, many people justify abortion if the child will have a short life or have a hard life. But what these thoughts fail to remember is that whether or not our lives are our idea of the perfect life, they are exactly the life God has planned for us. Each one of us is going to experience hard times, whether it be in our 83 years of life or 83 seconds. However, each of our lives have value. While researching trisomy 18, my family came across a blog about a little girl named Rebecca Budd. Rebecca has trisomy 18 and is now 3.5 years old, living a happy life. Yes, she has some physical and mental disabilities, but her mom writes each day about the blessing of Rebecca's life. The Budd family is connected with other families of trisomy 18 children, and they share the stories of 5, 7, and 10-year-olds with this same diagnosis. I know I've talked about some pretty bleak outcomes of trisomy 18, but I'd like you to keep in mind that although the statistics aren't promising, there are many stories of those who defy the odds. In God's perfect timing, my aunt and uncle's church had already scheduled their Sanctity of Life Sunday for November 20th, just 4 weeks before Tad's expected birthday. They asked my aunt and uncle to share their story, and on that day, God was glorified through Tad. They shared with their congregation that there had been hardships and pain, but also that there had been great joy and that they loved their baby exactly how he had been created. The next day, November 21st, 2011, Tad's heart stopped beating and we never got to meet him. This does not mean Tad's life didn't have a purpose or a plan. Tad's life had a huge impact on each one of his family members, our church families, and everyone that's heard his story. In these past few minutes, I've had the opportunity to share with you through my own personal story and others what trisomy 18 is, the impact of the doctor's response to these diagnoses, and the unique gift of each life. I've shown you all these things as a reminder that the value of life is not measured by our circumstances, no matter what difficulties those circumstances might include. Psalm 139 says that we are fearfully and wonderfully made, and that our frames were not hidden from God when he created us. All this isn't to say that these difficult times are going to be easy, but it's to remind us that God is in control, that there's something bigger than that little piece of the puzzle we're seeing. We might look at these types of situations and at the time think that nothing good could possibly come from them. But God can use these situations for his glory.